This postmortem photo of a strangely happy outlaw hung in a Winslow, Arizona saloon for decades. But who was he, and why the grin after death? Stick around to find out.
Hey, hey, and welcome back to Miss Kitty's Wild West Adventures. Today we're diving into the bizarre whiskey-soaked misadventure of two outlaws whose story didn't go the way they planned, especially when it came to their last drink. It all started on April 7, 1905. Two outlaws, William Evans and John Shaw, rode into Winslow, Arizona and went to the Wigwam Saloon. These weren't two ordinary outlaws, however. In fact, William Evans, also known as William Smythe, already had a criminal record. The two came into the saloon that night dressed to the nines in their finest clothes. The two bellied up to the bar and they ordered 2 shots of the finest whiskey. But before they could take a drink, they pulled out their revolvers and robbed 7 poker players, making away with a hefty sum of silver. And just like that, they disappeared into the night without firing or taking a shot. But here's where it gets interesting. You see, the saloon owner was a man by the name of Pete Pemberton, who also happened to be the deputy sheriff of Navajo County. So as soon as he found out that this had happened in his saloon, he grabbed City Marshal Joe Giles, and the two of them went off after the bandits. They chased him for a little while, and then they found some silver coins on the westbound railroad track. So they realized they might be going to Flagstaff. So the two lawmen hopped on a train and went to Flagstaff, searched all around. Flagstaff ended up to be a bust. But on the way back to Winslow, they got a tip. 2 dapper yet suspicious gentlemen were walking around the town of Canyon Diablo, which was about 25 miles west of Winslow. Canyon Diablo wasn't much more than a ghost town by then, but it still had its dangers. The Tombstone Epitaph once called it the toughest hellhole in the West, and with good reason. There was even a main street in the town of Canyon Diablo called Hell Street. As the 2 lawmen arrived in town, the sun was just starting to set, and they cast long shadows across the desert landscape. The 2 lawmen questioned local shopkeeper Fred Voles, who told them that 2 men, wearing very dark clothing, had been loitering outside his store all day. Suspicions arose when they exited the shop and found Evans and Shaw coming around the corner on the train station. They called out to the outlaws to submit to a search, but Shaw turned around and said, "No one searches us."
That's when all hell broke loose. A firefight erupted, bullets flying through the air. In just a few chaotic moments, 21 shots were fired. Shaw, fumbling with his revolver, missed 5 times before glancing down to reload. A fatal mistake. Sheriff Houck seized the opportunity and took him down with a shot to the head. Evans, wounded in the leg and shoulder, was taken into custody.
Shaw's body was buried in a shallow grave in the cemetery of Canyon Diablo, the hard soil making it impossible to dig very deep. As for Evans, he was first sent to Winslow and then to Yuma Territorial Prison to serve 9 years for his crimes. So who do you think had the toughest job in the Wild West? The lawmen or the outlaws? Leave a comment down below. Now you'd think that's where the story ends, right? But no, this is the Wild West, remember? So the next night, a couple of men who were employed by the Aztec Land and Cattle Company were having a drink at the Wigwam Saloon, and they found out what had happened to Evans and Shaw. But the biggest problem they had with the story is that the poor men never got to have their final drink of whiskey. So they decided they were going to oblige. So they boarded a westbound train to Canyon Diablo, fueled by their own liquid courage, and they dug up Shaw's grave. Then they poured whiskey down his throat. So here's a question for you. If you could dig up anyone from the Old West and have a glass of whiskey with them, who would it be and why? Leave a comment down below.
Not only that, but they posed him for a few photos, and as you can tell by the look on his face, he seemed to appreciate the gesture. When they were done, they left a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the coffin and reburied the outlaw.
The photos from that night hung in the Wigwam Saloon for decades. a reminder of the strange sense of justice of the Wild West. But, just like with anything, it didn't end there. 7 months later, in that very same saloon, Pete Pemberton and Bob Giles, the two lawmen who had hunted down Evans and Shaw, got into a drunken-fueled argument. Pemberton ended up shooting Giles dead, and in an ironic twist of fate, he was sentenced to the same prison that Evans was serving time in. So in just a few months, we have a robbery, a gunfight, a whiskey-soaked burial, and the fall of a lawman. But that's the Wild West for you. Never a dull moment, and you never know how it's going to end. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Miss Kitty's Wild West Adventures. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and ding the bell for notifications. And in the meantime, I'll catch you on down the trail. And just like that, we're off on another adventure. Come along. Gentleman wearing very fancy clothes had been loitering. Shaw's body was married. So here's a question for you. Who do you think had the toughest? Let me start over.